In January 1875, the quartermaster ledger from Fort Robinson recorded standard-issue buffalo robes weighing 12.4 pounds each, an exacting number penciled beside a note that their hair was to face inward against frostbitten cheeks. The same ledger logged ambient barracks temperatures dropping to 118 Grzelf despite green-tiled iron stoves roaring overnight, proving the myth of stoic cowboys snoring under starry skies without cover was snoring under starry skies without cover was a costly fiction. Nearby, civilian correspondence stored in the same archive mentions tin thermometers cracking as sleeping soldiers tucked them under coarse woolen socks to keep them from shattering, the glass fragrant with oil from whale derived cleaning fluid. The handwriting trembles, suggesting fingers numbed even while recalling the oily sheen that clung to blankets. Whispered between the lines is the way bodies were stacked close on plank bunks, contradicting romantic paintings of solitary figures beside embered campfires. The measurements insist on a truth as tangible as the scraped pine sleep was engineered, counted, rationed, and rarely solitary. If this soft frontier unraveling soothes you, please subscribe. Abigail Rios, a mestiza washerwoman stationed at Fort Union in the winter of 1867, lay in lamplight that flickered against a brass basin, polishing buttons while her breath misted above sewn ticking. The tallow candle perfumed the room with animal fat, and the scrape of her bone needle whispered through deerskin liners she stitched into cavalry mittens. She listened for the distant clank of ice shifting on the Mora River while packing sand between refurbished bed platforms, a technique her Pueblo grandmother taught her to retain heat like adobe. In her thin diary, the paper smelt faintly of starch. She recorded tying selenite fragments beneath quilts so moonlight could scatter across the ceiling. Calming green recruits kept awake by coyotes crunching through crusted snow. Abigail convinced them to layer horsehair pads over grey army blankets, explaining that trapped air warmed just enough to guard against the merino's chill sheen. Her hands, cracked from lye soap, arranged a circle of warmed branding irons in a bucket, releasing a metallic scent that mingled with roasting coffee, ensuring the barracks sleepers shared both warmth and rhythm before the night stiffened around their rattling windows. In 1870, the Army Medical Department shipped Casella thermographs to Fort Bridger, and Surgeon James Wheaton recorded nightly oscillations that dipped 18 degrees between midnight and dawn, even inside log quarters. The brass instrument ticked softly, its clockwork grazed by frost when the door opened, and on December 14 he noted the canvas ceiling sagging with condensed breath that froze into beadlets. Wheaton ordered canvas windbreaks erected around potbelly stoves, the treated cloth smelling sharply of alum as soldiers stretched it taut, and he timed how long each cot remained above freezing after fires sank to coals. 12 minutes for a bare bed, 36 when the mattress was stuffed with dried sagebrush. He charted that data beside receipts for civilian-made wool socks, proving the frontier winter bed was an assembly of calculated layers rather than a rugged afterthought. His log, now resting in the National Archives, still bears charcoal smudges from gloved fingers. Listening to the faint scratch of the thermograph's pen, he seems to ask without words why dime novelists insisted the prairie night was a place to prove stoicism instead of a laboratory of survival. 2 years earlier, Northern Cheyenne scout Red Feather shared a straw-lined earth lodge with ethnographer William Curtis near Tongue River, the air inside perfumed by willow bark steaming in a blackened kettle. Curtis's field notebooks from February 1868 describe the hush of snow muffled by bison hides stretched over the lodge apex, and the way Red Feather arranged juniper ash in a low trench so embers glowed like buried stars. The scout's wife laid cattail fluff beneath trade blankets, and the softened fibers clung to Curtis's wool trousers, leaving downy streaks that carried the smell of marsh water even as he left at dawn. When Curtis asked how the family slept during the moon of deep snows, Red Feather pointed to cedar chips scattered under their heads, their resinous scent warding spirits and insects alike. The guide explained, his voice barely louder than the sizzling sap, that sleep was a covenant with winter spirits, layers arranged east to west so dreams followed the sun's return. His words press against Curtis's scripted sketches, countering the American myth that indigenous winter rest was primitive. instead revealing precise rituals tuned to Frost's brittle hush. By 1881, Swedish homesteader Ingrid Halvorsen kept a weather diary near Fort Keogh in Montana Territory, the ink smelling faintly of linseed because she thawed it beside a lamp each night. She described chiseling blocks of sod to fashion a sleeping alcove within her dugout, the earthen walls crumbly yet warm to the touch, flecked with mica that sparkled when her pine splint torch sputtered. Ingrid lined her straw tick with felted scraps cut from sailcloth brought by Hudson Bay freighters, each piece still tasting of salt when damp frost licked the seams. She hammered spent ammunition shells into tiny bells, suspending them over her son's bedding so any shift in the door draft chimed softly, warning of gusts that could snuff their coals. Her Sunday entries mentioned draping copper kettles filled with boiled molasses over their feet, the syrup thick and fragrant, holding heat far longer than water. A trick she swore she learned reading a Norwegian almanac dated 1834. The effort granted them the power to sleep through wind shrieks that rattled their single-pane window, and she writes, "Sleep is a fortress of straw and song," insisting practical artistry, rather than brute endurance, preserved their family through the -30 gale. A Northern Pacific Railway surveyor named Thomas Belden tested Woolpile Heights along the Yellowstone in January 1883, using a yardstick marked in charred segments because ink froze too readily. His field notes rustle with grit, and he scratched in margins how the 3.5-inch pile retained heat 17 minutes longer than the 2-inch standard when exposed to a thermometer encased in mercury-streaked leather. Belden stationed a French-made aneroid barometer beside his rolled blankets to monitor pressure shifts that foretold night squalls, the device ticking like a muted clock in the dark. He measured charcoal pancakes placed inside canvas pouches, each disc pressing warmth against his chest and exhaling a charcoal-sweet aroma. As frost rimed his beard, he wrote with numb fingers that he could feel the difference in breath. Humidity trapped beneath the thicker wool, its lanolin tang stronger, its loft resisting collapse. His data read as quiet rebellion against company law, that the railroad's tent camps were cozy. The numbers expose an improvisational engineering, granting exhausted survey crews the crucial luxury of staying asleep while sleet pecked at taut rope. Such measurements prove that raw courage was only the garnish atop meticulous thermal arithmetic. The wind still carried gunpowder soot, yet Philly-born laundress Mavis Pennington recorded the hush of Fort Ellis's midnight in 1874 as she set pig-fat lamps along wardroom aisles. She described the glow as honeyed, catching on icicles that dangled from the ceiling joints like glass fingers, and noted how the scent of boiled lye clung to the wool she wrung out barehanded. Her journal marks the exact hour, 2000 to 2000 m, when she stirred cedar shavings inside iron braziers positioned under stretchers to wick moisture from soldiers' boots. Mavis listened to the faint crackle of sap blistering off the shavings, then layered surplus ponchos over pillows stuffed with shredded newspaper, each page whispering headlines from St. Louis even as it absorbed sweat. She claimed that the rustle lulled light sleepers hardened by cannon drills, a paper lullaby. Her routine gave the ward the power to keep fevers at bay, as body heat no longer wickered into damp linens. Instead of the gunfight bravado sketched in newsprint, her reality was the slow orchestra of textiles, embers, and whispered hymns that coaxed rest from a hostile raftered night. Frost rests. Lanterns sigh. Cotton remembers every touch. In 1885 at the Bozeman Trail Junction, Chinese herbalist Lao Min set up a medicine tent stroked by the scent of dried chrysanthemum, offering railroad tie hacks and freighters heated sleeping bricks. His ledger, written in ink scented with sandalwood, details firing yellow clay bricks to 400 degrees Celsius in a kiln fashioned from salvaged stoveplates, then wrapping them in mulberry paper before tucking them into travelers' fur-lined boots. Snow squeaked outside, and Lau noted the contrast between the crisp night and the moist heat lingering against arches, ensuring sleep arrived quickly under patched quilts stitched with cobalt thread. He balanced Western pocket watches beside the bricks, recording that the warmth faded after 2 hours unless the brick rested atop a cedar plank, which extended comfort by 40 minutes thanks to resinous insulation. The ledger also mentions he infused cotton batting with tiger balm, its menthol bite clearing nostrils clogged by smoke, keeping breath slow. Lau, though rarely mentioned in town ledgers, gave itinerant labourers strength to survive sub-zero layovers, and his quiet expertise undercut the era's prejudice, proving cross-cultural craft was as vital as any revolver. A Paiute midwife named Narrow Water sheltered Mormon emigrants near Ruby Valley in January 1862, guiding them into willow shelters braided against a basalt outcrop that exhaled warmth through fissures. Her oral history, captured on Edison wax cylinder decades later, crackles with static yet carries the rhythm of wind-rattling sagebrush. She speaks of lining sleeping hollows with rabbit skins, their softness like river silt against skin, and explains how she ground sweet flag root, so its peppery scent masked the musk of unwashed bodies. The emigrants traded her iron nails, and she hammered them into the rock to suspend baskets of snow above fires, letting mist humidify the crisp air. When children whimpered, she hushed them with songs measuring the time it took embers to fade, every verse a timer. The cylinder also preserves the hush when she describes stepping outside to stir snowbanks over footprints, concealing their refuge from raiding patrols, not out of fear, but to protect the sanctity of sleep from intrusion. Her voice reveals respect for the night's sacredness, as if slumber itself were a treaty between strangers and land. In 1890, meteorologist Eleanor Fiske, stationed at Denver's Signal Service outpost, dispatched data bristling with precision about the High Plains' nocturnal cold snaps, pairing figures with observations of bedding experiments she orchestrated among telegraphers. She suspended a sling psychrometer above a cot layered with horsehair, its damp muslin wick releasing a mineral tang as it twirled, and logged how relative humidity plunged to 18% by dawn, leaving lips cracked and less coated with rendered bear grease. Fiske convinced operators to sleep in shifts with their boots inverted over a steam pipe that throbbed like a distant drum, preventing leather from freezing into rigid shells. Her precise telegraph at 3012 am. On February 8 reads, Subject 2, pulse steady. Wool felt retains 19 degrees more heat than government-issue muslin. Eyelids relaxed at 46 degrees F, ambient. The men teased her for mothering them, but her records show sick days dropping, proving thermal strategy granted working power in an era when telegraph clicks stitched the frontier's heartbeat. She reflects in a margin note, comfort is a code, not an indulgence, tethering data to a philosophy that still hums beneath the brittle spark of winter wires. An 1879 investigative report by journalist Horace Glidden sniffed through the reputed opulence of Deadwood's Winter Palace Hotel, finding instead drafty walls and moth-eaten coverlets that rustled like dried leaves. He measured the guest rooms with a pocket thermometer sliding beneath the doorframe, the bulb cooling to 22 degrees F within minutes despite a coal stove groaning in the hall. Glidden described the stubborn smell of unwashed bear rugs, their fur stiff with frost, and wrote of gamblers huddled under velvet curtains repurposed as blankets, the fabric tasting faintly of copper from spilled whiskey. He interviewed a hotel laundress who whispered that management ordered her to leave the windows unsealed so cigar smoke could escape, a choice that allowed sleet to needle guests' cheeks as they slept. Her testimony was excised in the final print edition, suppressed because the proprietor bought advertisement columns, but the manuscript survives, edges singed. It reveals that the glamour sold to Eastern readers was a marketing sleep, hiding the reality of chattering teeth and improvised insulation. The suppressed truth surfaces like creaking floorboards, reminding us that reputations often silence the night's real engineers, the women who begged for nailed shutters and thicker quilts. Salt crusts whispered along the edges of a cattleman's journal discovered near Abilene, Kansas in 1902, written by Tejano drover Mateo Alvarez, who camped beside the frozen Smoky Hill River during the blizzard of 1871. The rediscovered journal, found inside a tin biscuit box decades later, records how he layered syrupes scented with mesquite smoke over his crew's bedrolls, then spread fresh manure in a ring around their camp to absorb cold moisture, a practice the men initially mocked. Mateo set Spanish handbells atop tent poles, their bronze mouths catching moonlight and chiming when gusts shifted, and he timed matches between coyotes' yips and the crackle of mesquite fed into pits lined with limestone. He explained that the limestone, still warm from the day, radiated heat against their heels, granting cattle guards enough rest to guard the herd at dawn. The journal had been hidden by a foreman embarrassed to admit reliance on Mexican tricks, but its rediscovery by Mateo's granddaughter in 1902 finally credited his ingenuity, a cycle revealing how prejudice chilled recognition until family memory thawed it again. Snow hushes. Ash smolders. Footsteps fade. Swiss geologist Henri Dufour traversed the frozen San Juan Mountains in 1879, cataloguing mineral veins by day and, at night, measuring the insulating qualities of ore sacks filled with crushed pumice. His field report, latticed with contour sketches, mentions the sulphurous scent of nearby hot springs mingling with the musk of wet wool as he repurposed assay pans into bed warmers heated over spirit lamps. The lamps hissed softly, halos of blue light quivering across tent canvas, and Dufour noted how pumice retained a gentle warmth, its porous texture almost velvety against his calves. He recorded temperatures with a Celsius thermometer imported from Geneva, the glass sweating when tucked under layered Hudson Bay blankets. Despite his scientific rigor, mining companies dismissed his advice to house workers in pumice-lined bunkhouses because the material was deemed too costly to transport. His manuscript languished in a Zurich archive until 1964, when a graduate student translating 19th-century exploratory texts flagged the overlooked section on sleeping technologies, rediscovering the blueprint for safer alpine camps. The loop from observation to neglect to revival underscores how sleepcraft knowledge can hibernate beneath corporate priorities until fresh eyes warm it awake. In 1869, Polish-Jewish tailor Sulim Karlin operated a dry goods stall in Laramie, stitching quilted ticking filled with shredded newsprint and goose down reclaimed from riverbanks. His account book notes the crackle of the paper stuffing, a sound he said calmed Union Pacific switchmen accustomed to telegraph chatter, and he rubbed each quilt with beeswax to repel melted snow, leaving a honeyed aroma. Sulim's sister Dina hefted iron goosenecked irons heated on the stove, smoothing seams while the iron's tang mingled with the sweet wax. Their quilts sold swiftly until a company edict insisted workers purchase official bedding branded with the railroad logo. Rather than fight openly, Sulim stitched his initials in hidden cross-stitches near the hem, a silent rebellion. The policy suppressed his livelihood, forcing him to pack unsold quilts in cedar chests whose scent clung to their folds. Decades later, during a 1937 Works Progress Administration interview, retired switchman Arthur Wainwright recalled retrieving those chests from an attic and rediscovering the quilt's layered warmth, marveling at the newspaper headlines from 1869 that still rustled inside. The quilt's second life affirmed the value of immigrant craft smothered by corporate uniformity until nostalgia pried open the lid. In 1888, Arapaho healer Star by Night collaborated with Episcopalian missionary Dr. Redia Helen Wyeth to adapt buffalo hair sleeping pellets for fevered patients at the Wind River Agency Hospital during a winter outbreak. The hospital's pine floors smelled of carbolic acid, sharp enough to sting eyes, yet beneath that chemical bite lay the earthy musk of buffalo hair braided into mats. Star by Night insisted on weaving sage stems into the braids, their resinous perfume enveloping patients as they lay beneath quilts stitched by Eastern Aid societies. Dr. Quilt. Wyeth documented the cross-cultural design in neat copperplate, timing how the mats wicked sweat without chilling the skin. Wind chill outside clawed at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, but patients maintained core warmth better than on straw ticks. She also recorded a lullaby sung in Arapaho, its cadence aligned with the rhythm of a weighted pendulum clock, so nurses knew when to rotate warm rocks from the stove under the blankets. When federal inspectors toured, they dismissed the mats as unsanitary, ordering them burned, a silencing rooted in bureaucratic suspicion rather than evidence. Secretly, Wyeth saved one mat, folding it into a storage trunk. In 1921, Her grandson donated that trunk to the American Museum of Natural History, where researchers finally tested the fiber blend, rediscovering the practical sophistication of indigenous knowledge once stamped out by policy. Blizzard breath. Kettles hum. Pine listens. During the Silver Panic winter of 1893, Tlingit freightmaster Nathan J. Kale anchored his coastal crew at Fort Wrangell's trading post, repurposing fur sealskins into layered sleeping sacks lined with crushed spruce tips. His logbook, smelling of fish oil, notes how the spruce released a citrusy aroma as body heat woke the resins, easing lungs cramped by damp air. Nathan stitched copper bells salvaged from ship rigging along the sack openings to alert sleepers when ice-laden gusts slapped the door. He recorded the process of beating the skins until pliable, the thud echoing like muffled drums against the plank floor. His sacks allowed traders from inland territories to rest nearly sweat, free despite the post's stone walls weeping condensation. Army observers derided the practice as too fishy, and Nathan's techniques faded as canneries imposed standard canvas bunks. Yet in 1972, anthropologist Catherine Driscoll uncovered his logbook in a Juneau attic, still oily, rekindling knowledge about aromatic insulation. The rediscovery highlights how maritime sleep technology drifted out of mind when industry standardized dryness, only to surface when scholars sought sustainable materials against renewed cold. An 1895 blizzard trapped mail stage driver Lillian O'Hara near Rawlins, Wyoming, forcing her to improvise a snow cave. Her posthumously published memoir recounts carving the chamber with a folding entrenching tool until the spade's iron tasted like blood on her tongue from chapped lips. Inside, she layered mailbags scented of glue and ink to create a floor, then hung a lantern whose glass clouded with condensed breath, casting buttery light on packed snow walls. Lillian stuffed letters under her coat to keep them dry, each envelope crackling against her ribs, and noted the way her horse's breath steamed in the entrance like a gentle engine. She propped aneroid readings in the cave, noting pressure drops that warned the gale would intensify. She slept in increments, counting her pulse against the ticking lantern regulator to ensure she didn't slip into hypothermia's lure. Her technique saved both her and the Federal Mail, granting the public their news despite winter's siege. She reflects, sleep in the drifts was a bargain struck with the storm, implying resilience was negotiated through tactile artistry rather than bravado. A saloon ledger from Leadville, 1880, recently digitized by the Colorado Historical Society, lists nightly rentals of blanket stacks, maintained by formerly enslaved entrepreneur Charles Pine Jenkins. He layered rough-spun wool with muslin dipped in pine tar, the aroma thick and medicinal, creating makeshift bunks in the saloon's cellar where miners slept between shifts. Pine charged extra for those who wanted heated river stones wrapped in burlap, the stones sweating mineral scents as they cooled. He recorded each customer's duration, finding the average rest lasted 3 hours, enough to prevent the tremors that plagued crews working freezing shafts. When a city inspector forced him to close the cellar due to unsanitary vapors, Pine's meticulous ledgers were seized, erasing his contribution from public view. A century later, descendants scanning courthouse archives rediscovered the ledger, its edges brittle yet stained with tar. The rediscovery exposes how black ingenuity underpinned winter endurance in Colorado's boomtowns, a chapter suppressed under the pretense of hygiene while actually motivated by prejudice. Cinders settle. Canvas breathes. Sleep circles. In 1876, Kiowa scout Sintaup introduced U.S. cavalrymen to the breathing hole. Practice digging narrow vents in snow shelters near the Canadian River. Lieutenant Henry Botkin's field diary, housed in the Library of Congress, captures the creak of leather gloves as soldiers carved the vents, and the dank smell of earth when warmer air seeped through. Botkin measured carbon dioxide buildup with a Draeger apparatus borrowed from a German engineer, noting how the vent sustained safe levels throughout the night, preventing headaches that had haunted winter marches. He scribbled that the vent's sound was a gentle hiss, like wind through cornstalks, and marveled at how Kiowa engineering tamed suffocating stillness. His superiors, however, classified the technique under field curiosities and never issued formal guidance, letting the knowledge drift. When a Smithsonian researcher catalogued Botkin's diary in 1958, the breathing hole sketch caught his attention, and he cited it in a study on snow shelter design, finally acknowledging Indigenous mentorship that had once been relegated to the margins. In the mining town of Bannack, 1867, widow and seamstress Charity Delorme ran a boarding house where she layered mattress ticking with crushed charcoal and goose quills. Her handwritten instructions, preserved in a family Bible, outline how she baked the charcoal in a Dutch oven until it smelled faintly metallic, then enclosed it between muslin sheets to create radiant warmth. She hung strips of orange peel near the beds, the citrus perfume masking the damp iron scent of the nearby creek. Charity mandated that boarders hang their boots over steaming kettles set on wrought iron hooks, the hiss of water calming rowdy gamblers more effectively than gun threats. She noted that the charcoal-filled ticking stayed warm for 4 hours, long enough for her guests to sleep between night watch rotations guarding gold claims. Her rules kept them healthy through a season when scurvy and frostbite claimed rivals. The power of her bedding lay in balancing dryness, fragrance and heat, a domestic bulwark against Montana's biting dark. A surgeon's report from Camp Halleck in Nevada, 1873, details amputee veteran Isaac Whistle. Boone's invention of a triple-layered sleep sling that cradled his stump above frigid ground. Boone stitched saddlebags into a hammock lined with velvet scraps salvaged from officer uniforms, the fabric smelling of cigar smoke even after washing. He threaded the sling between bunk posts, letting his stump hover while iron stove heat swirled underneath, and sprinkled crushed peppermint leaves to mask the scent of healing salves. The surgeon clocked Boone's heart rate before and after the modification, noting improved rest and reduced phantom pain, evidence that ergonomics mattered in winter regeneration. Fellow soldiers left the camp soon after, and the sling's details vanished when Boone died. Decades later, a 1909 veteran's pension file surfaced with a sketch of the sling tucked inside, rediscovering the design. The loop from innovation to obscurity and back shows how personal contraptions that preserve dignity were easily lost when official records prioritized ordnance over comfort. Embers wink, blankets pulse, silence steadies. In 1874, German-born itinerant photographer Matilda Klauser wintered with Basque shepherds near the Owyhee River, documenting their sheepskin-lined stone huts. Her diary smells faintly of collodion chemicals, and she describes the soft scuff of felt-soled sandals gliding over reed mats layered atop sun-warmed flagstones. The shepherds wedged coals into terracotta jars, sealing them with cork that released a sweet, earthy scent as heat seeped overnight. Matilda noted the curious addition of garlic hung in braids against the door. Its pungency masked the damp lanolin aroma, easing sleep. She measured the hut's internal temperature using a Fahrenheit thermometer suspended from her tripod, discovering a steady 48 degrees Fahrenheit despite 10°W. 10°6 to the sex to by Bayaf winds shrieking outside. Her glass plates captured blurred images of men wrapped in crimson blankets, their faces glowing in lamplight. Sadly, the Basque community asked her to withhold publication, fearing cattlemen would steal their techniques. Her archive remained unseen until 1999 when descendants curated a gallery show, allowing the world to finally witness the interplay of stone, skin, and fragrant air that cocooned shepherds through brutal winters. In 1882, Salt Lake City, Danish midwife Ragnhild Sorensen assisted pregnant settlers lodged in unheated adobe chambers, devising a sleep wreath of braided rye straw soaked in rosemary infusion. The wreath, when warmed beside a brick oven, released a sharp, piney aroma that kept mothers awake just long enough to nurse newborns before drifting into deep sleep. Ragnhild lined cradles with lamb's wool dyed indigo, the colour believed to calm colicky infants, and placed polished riverstones under bed legs to elevate mattresses away from cold-packed earth. She logged her practices in the Deseret Hospital Registry, describing the scrape of straw when rebraided and the crackling salt from cured meats stored nearby. Though physicians initially scoffed, they later noted reduced pneumonia cases among her patients. Her techniques gave women the strength to rest between labor pains and midnight feedings, transforming icy adobe into sanctuaries. Yet the hospital's male administrators summarized her contributions merely as nursing intuition in published reports, obscuring the calculated thermal design until personal letters resurfaced in 1968. Snow exhales. Cribs creak. Rosemary lingers. When U.S. Geological Survey cartographer Alfred Bain camped beside the Gunnison River in 1884, he charted not only terrain but the temperature gradients inside canvas. Whelan. Tents he modified with double flies. He described the hiss of the river muted by snowdrifts and the smell of oiled canvas sticking to his gloves. Bain stitched an inner muslin ceiling coated with paraffin, creating a vapor barrier that glimmered in lantern light like waxed parchment. He measured radiant heat using a thermocouple wired to a galvanometer. A cutting-edge instrument then, logging the needle's twitch as firelight flickered. The readings proved a 5-degree retention gain that let cartographers sleep without frost forming on moustaches. His report, filed to Washington, advocated adopting the double fly for Army Scouts, but supply chiefs deemed it extravagant. The recommendation died in bureaucratic silence until a 1911 reenactment expedition rediscovered his schematics and finally applied the method, demonstrating again a cycle of insight stifled by thrift, then revived when experience demanded comfort. In 1878, Lakota elder Iron Cedar hosted journalist Clara Haynes inside a snowbanked timber lodge near the Powder River, detailing the winter bedding arrangement that shimmered with cultural significance. Iron Cedar spread out painted bison hides scented with sage smoke, their surfaces smooth yet rugged, and he layered them atop willow mats that creaked softly as weight settled. Clara noted how pine resin torches cast amber light on the lodge poles, and the air tasted of juniper berries simmering in a clay pot. Iron Cedar explained that each family member slept positioned according to season, with eldest children nearest the fire to learn vigilance, while infants nestled within cradle boards lined with rabbit fur. He lifted a pouch of red ochre, dusting it over the thresholds to honor protective spirits, its metallic tang lingering. Clara recorded one rhetorical question. Do your people forget the snow listens when you breathe? A gentle challenge to Eastern readers. Her article, however, was heavily edited, reducing the sleep arrangement to exotic. Only her original draft, preserved in a locked trunk in Chicago, now reveals the full harmony between ritual, warmth, and familial bonds that structured Lakota winter rest. A ledger from the 1886 Dodge City Municipal Poorhouse lists allocations of coal quilts, a term referencing blankets interlaced with flannel pockets filled with pulverized charcoal. Overseer Maud Greevy devised them after reading a French industrial hygiene manual, and she recorded the cloying smell of coal dust mixing with lavender sachets she tucked inside to keep residents calm. The quilts rustled like dry leaves as recipients shifted, and Maud noted how the charcoal distributed warmth evenly across frail bodies. She timed their cooling using a borrowed pocket watch, finding 6 hours of sustained comfort. Despite success, city councilmen accused her of misusing coal supplies and ordered the quilts dismantled, suppressing a cost-effective solution out of political spite. Maud quietly sewed the pockets shut over themselves, preserving the design. In 1954, a historian reviewing Dodge City welfare archives stumbled upon her sketches, reviving interest in heat-retentive textiles. The rediscovery underscores how bureaucratic pettiness temporarily doused innovation, only for archival patience to relight it. Ice listens. Coals breathe. Lavender clings. During the winter of 1870, Comanche trader Laami collaborated with Mexican blacksmith Pedro Ortega near Palo Duro Canyon to craft iron bed frames with hollow rails filled with heated sand. The workshop smelled of hammered iron and roasted chilies shared at midnight, and Laami's deerskin gloves creaked as he guided the bellows. Ortega's forge roared, sparks spitting like fireflies while they poured sand into the red-hot tubes. At night, the frames radiated warmth, the rails clicking softly as metal contracted. Families sleeping atop buffalo hides felt a steady glow against their calves, a luxury compared to cold ground. Their partnership ended when the US Army forced layoffs, citing resource conservation, effectively suppressing the hybrid technology. In 1987, archaeologists excavating the canyon unearthed a fragment of the hollow rail, still packed with fused sand, validating oral histories dismissed for generations. The discovery loop completed, revealing how cross-cultural craftsmanship engineered long-lasting warmth before policy severed the collaboration. A letter penned in 1889 by Yakima interpreter Maria Running. Fawn describes guiding ethnobotanist Frederick Coville through winter lodges near the Columbia Plateau. She detailed the scent of camas root steaming in pit ovens, a sweet aroma mingling with smoke that blackened the rafters. Maria highlighted the cedar bark mattresses softened in river water, their fibers pliant as worn leather, and she explained how sleepers positioned quartz pebbles warmed by coals against temples to ward off headaches. Coville's published report skimmed these sleeping details, focusing instead on plant taxonomy, inadvertently silencing the ritual balance between nutrition, breath, and rest. Maria's letter, preserved in her family cedar box, later surfaced during a 1975 museum exhibition, rediscovering the interplay she had carefully described. The letter's resurgence reminded scholars that comfort technologies were as vital as food in surviving punishing winters, and the omission hinted at reverence. The community guarded certain knowledge, revealing only fragments until trust was earned. Wind mutters. Pebbles glow. Cedar sighs. In 1891, itinerant preacher Elijah Snowden journeyed through Utah Territory, chronicling nights spent in half-dug sod houses known as dugouts. He described the earthen smell dampening his hymn book pages and the flicker of whale oil lamps casting bronze halos on pressed tin ceilings. Families insulated their beds with feather ticks wrapped in ticking dyed with walnut hulls, releasing the scent of bitter chocolate. Elijah observed them sprinkling fine ash between layers to deter insects, the powder soft under fingertips. He measured interior humidity with a borrowed hygrometer, noticing moisture levels steadied at 45% when vents carved into the sod walls remained partially open, their edges rimed with ice yet necessary to keep lungs clear. He ruminated on how congregants knelt in the same spaces where they slept, blending devotion and rest. His sermons later emphasized that the body's need for warmth was as sacred as any scripture, yet church authorities downplayed such practical theology, preferring tales of martyrdom. Centuries later, historians reread his journals and rediscovered a gentle theology of blankets and breath. An 1872 survey of Fort Garland's Hispano settlers by ethnographer Charles Sipple catalogued mosquero curtains, goat-hair drapes hung around beds to trap heat. Sipple noted the musky scent of the hair, softened with rosemary water, and the way the curtains swayed like soft bells when night breezes slipped through adobe cracks. He sketched women weaving on upright looms, their fingers stained with indigo as they hummed corridos that blended with the rhythmic thump of loom beams. The curtains, he observed, reduced drafts so effectively that interior temperatures stayed 10 degrees warmer. Yet territorial officials dismissed them as superstitions, ordering homes to adopt American furnishings for appearance's sake, a suppression under the guise of civilization. In 1935, a photographer capturing New Mexican folkways found preserved mosquero curtains in a storage trunk, photographing their intricate knots and sharing the images in national magazines. The rediscovery looped the practice into public appreciation, validating generations who had quietly kept weaving despite official disdain. Night leans, looms sigh, heat lingers. In 1877, Bohemian glassblower Anton Novak wintered in Idaho City, crafting double-walled glass bottles intended to function as bedwarmers. He blew molten glass until it shimmered like amber, the workshop heavy with sand dust and wood smoke. Each bottle bore etched snowflakes, and he filled them with boiling water, corking them with spruce stoppers that perfumed the air. When placed under quilts, the bottles glowed faintly, emitting a soft clink as water sloshed. Miners purchased them eagerly until a wagon mishap shattered a shipment, prompting investors to deem the design too fragile and abandon production. Anton's notes, stained with soot, describe his disappointment. In 2001, local historians cataloguing mining artifacts found one intact bottle buried in a refuse heap, its interior still bearing mineral deposits. Modern glassmakers admire its craftsmanship, rediscovered proof that artistry once warmed the Wild West night before economics chilled the venture. A US Signal Corps camp near Helena in 1886 appointed Corporal Jacob Fujikawa to experiment with Japanese futon techniques adapted to Montana climes. He layered cotton batting with rice straw imported via San Francisco, the smell earthy and faintly sweet, then wrapped the futon in canvas treated with linseed oil. Jacob noted the satisfying thump as he beat the mats each morning to redistribute fibers, preventing mold. He recorded results in precise columns. Futons retained heat better than straw ticks when paired with bear-hide throws, and soldiers reported fewer backaches. Despite success, superiors considered the practice too foreign and ordered a return to regulation cots, suppressing the experiment. Jacob mailed his notes to his brother in Yokohama, who published them in a local newspaper. A century later, researchers studying Trans-Pacific cultural exchange cited the article, rediscovering how Japanese technique briefly softened Rocky Mountain barracks. The knowledge crossed the ocean twice, reminding us that sleek craft migrates even when authorities resist. Frost sighs. Straw listens. Memory glows. In 1883, Bannock storyteller White Quill preserved in beadwork patterns the sequence of nightly winter prayers sung before sleep. Each bead colour corresponded to an herb burnt beside bedding: blue for sage, red for cedar, white for sweetgrass, their aromas layering like soft chords. Anthropologist Lydia Hart copied the bead legend into her notebook, describing the crackle of the herb bundles and the way smoke curled against bark walls. She also noted the tactile comfort of bison robes lined with smoked salmon skin, lending a faint savoury scent that repelled insects even in cold months. When Lydia submitted her report, editors removed the musical analysis, fearing readers would fetishize the ritual. Her notation faded in obscurity until 1995, when ethnomusicologist Daniel Reyes found the original pages tucked inside a book at an estate sale. The rediscovery allowed the rhythmic sequence to be sung again, revealing how scent, song and fibre interlaced to coax tranquil sleep. A cultural weave nearly unravelled by editorial caution. In 1871, Cornish miners in Butte fashioned cousin jacks, rope hammocks set above thin tin pans filled with embers. Miner Gwyneth Trelawney wrote letters home describing the metallic clang as she adjusted chains and the acrid smell of coal dust mixing with peppermint oil she dabbed under her nose to mask fumes. She lined the hammocks with felt soaked in lanolin, ensuring warmth hugged her spine. Gwyneth recorded how the tin pans radiated heat upward, allowing her to sleep in air otherwise brittle enough to freeze spittle mid-fall. Her letters, however, never reached Cornwall. A mining superintendent intercepted them, worried tales of harsh conditions would deter recruits. The letters lay sealed in a company safe until a 1970s Labour historian pried them loose, rediscovering the intimate adjustments women miners made to survive subterranean winters. The cycle of censorship and revelation underscores how silence, motivated by profit, kept the public from understanding the sensory engineering required underground. Flame crackles, felt softens, secrets breathe. On the northern plains in 1887, Métis freighter Lucien Deschamps recorded sleeping inside a Red River cart tilted on its side, wheels creaking in the night wind. He lined the cart with buffalo robes treated in smoked alder, the aroma rich and slightly sweet, and scattered spruce needles underneath to soften the wood's ridges. He hung an aneroid barometer from the axle, its brass gleaming in lamplight to anticipate dawn storms. Lucien also stuffed knitted socks with parched cornmeal, holding them against his chest to absorb sweat, a technique learned from his Cree relatives. His logbook, kept in French, remained unread in a Manitoba church trunk until 1982, when translators uncovered its details. The rediscovered passages reveal how mobility shaped winter sleeping practices. The cart became a cradle of warmth, proving ingenuity flourished wherever wheels met snow, even when official histories favoured station houses over itinerant life. In 1899, a tuberculosis sanatorium near Santa Fe experimented with cloud beds, outdoor sleeping platforms hung with gauze to promote fresh air cures. Nurse Estelle Big Crow reported how the night frost glittered on the gauze, making it shimmer like thin ice, while kerosene heaters hummed at the platform's foot. Patients inhaled the resinous aroma of nearby piñon fires, and Estelle recorded the rustle of gauze when coyotes bayed. She lined mattresses with felted goat hair to resist dew, noting improved rest rates. Yet when funding waned, administrators dismantled the platforms, claiming the gauze looked unseemly. Estelle's diaries, rediscovered in 2008, highlight how fresh air ideologies adapted by incorporating indigenous knowledge about airflow and scent. The cycle from bold experimentation to budgetary silence and back into scholarly view reflects how economic chill can freeze progress until a patient historian thaws the record. Night stirs, gauze glows, breath steadies. In 1866, humming telegraph wires above Fort Benton accompanied the meticulous notes of telegrapher Samuel Park, who recorded the creak of bunkhouse hinges every time the temperature plunged below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. He described sleeping atop bales of buffalo hair destined for eastern markets, their prickly texture softened by canvas soaked in boiled linseed oil. Samuel tucked a tuning fork under his pillow, its metal cold as he tapped it to ensure fingers retained sensation. The fork's hum vibrated through skull bones, reminding him he was alive in the icy quiet. He brewed coffee until its bitter aroma filled the room, then poured it into stoneware jugs he rolled in blankets at his feet. When company directives later prohibited using sale goods for bedding, Samuel's technique vanished from official logs. Decades later, a Telegraph reunion pamphlet recounted his story, reviving knowledge that commerce goods often doubled as life-saving bedding when the Missouri River froze shipments. In 1880, Durango, black barber Elijah Reese operated a sleep parlor. Behind his shop, offering night porters heated iron combs wrapped in velvet to warm their hands before bed. The shop smelled of bay rum and singed hair, and Elijah noted the faint clatter of the adjacent train yard like a percussive lullaby. He lined cots with newspaper dipped in vinegar to neutralize sweat odors, the sour scent sharp yet cleansing. Elijah's business records show how the warmed combs, when slipped into sleeves, acted as crude heating pads, letting porters rest without numb fingers. City officials eventually shut the parlor, citing zoning laws, erasing his innovation from public memory. Only when a descendant displayed the velvet-wrapped comb at a heritage fair did historians recognize this fusion of grooming tools and sleep aids, rediscovering a microeconomy that sustained black laborers through frigid railroad nights. Rails hum. Combs glow. Vinegar clears. An 1873 ledger from Santa Fe's Sisters of Loretto School documents how the nuns crafted feather-filled comfort loaves, oblong pillows heated in bread ovens once the day's baking finished. The loaves smelled of yeast and ash, and novices carried them with flour-dusted aprons, placing them at students' feet in dormitories lined with adobe walls. Sister Agnes measured the temperature using a mercury thermometer borrowed from the infirmary, ensuring the loaves cooled to 120 degrees Fahrenheit before distribution to avoid burns. They absorbed dampness from stockings, keeping toes warm enough to stave off chilblains. When a fire inspector misinterpreted the practice as a fire risk, he banned it, and the sisters returned to standard blankets. In 1996, restoration workers found a handwritten recipe for comfort loaves tucked into a hymnal, reviving awareness of the technique. The discovery loop highlights how cautionary regulation, though well-intended, can extinguish gentle innovations until documentation rekindles them. A 1901 oral history from Hopi elder Morning June recounts her youth in the 1870s, when villagers constructed ceremonial kivas used as winter sleeping chambers during specific rites. She described descending ladders carved smooth by hands, the air perfumed by burning cedar and fermented blue corn. The sandstone walls radiated stored heat, and she remembered the soft thud of dancers' footsteps above as she drifted to sleep on sheep pelts. Morning June mentioned sprinkling ground turquoise at the threshold, a shimmering dust that symbolized dawn light even in darkness. Ethnographers initially omitted these sleep details, focusing only on ritual. Later rediscovery of her recordings by Pueblo scholars reframed kivas not just as sacred spaces, but as engineered warm refuges, reinforcing the theme that ritual and rest intertwined intimately. It shows reverence prompted her earlier silence. Certain secrets remained hush until listeners proved respectful. Heat sighs, stone holds, turquoise glints. During the 1885 cattle die-off known as the Big Die-Op, black cowboy Rufus Mayfield sheltered under an overturned chuck wagon near Miles City, stuffing canvas gaps with hanks of frozen prairie grass. His trail diary, scented with grease stains, recounts how he packed the grass until it prickled like quills, then draped a tarp soaked in coffee to mask the odor of nearby carcasses. The tarp steamed when heated stones were placed beside it, releasing a roasted scent that steadied his nerves. Rufus set his harmonica on the wagon floor. The metal chilled his lips when he played low notes to soothe restless horses. Sleep came in bursts, each accompanied by the crack of distant ice-laden tree limbs. His diary emphasizes that music, scent, and improvised insulation granted him strength to round up survivors at dawn. The entry faded from print until a modern anthology of African-American cowboy narratives reprinted it, rediscovering a winter survival strategy long overshadowed by heroic gunfights. In 1894, saloon pianist Eleanor Choate toured Montana's mining camps, noting in letters to her sister how boarding houses supplied coal roses, briquettes shaped like blossoms to warm beds. She described their asphalt smell, mellowed by sachets of crushed lavender tucked beneath pillows. Eleanor listened to the soft crumble as the briquettes cooled, and she wrote that the silhouettes looked like dark peonies on white linen. Her letters mention convicts at nearby Deer Lodge Penitentiary producing the roses, their labor hidden behind brick walls. When the prison fire of 1900 destroyed manufacturing records, the coal rose story vanished. A century later, preservationists found one intact rose embedded in collapsed brickwork, its layers still faintly perfumed. The rediscovery reconnected prison industry with civilian comfort, revealing how forgotten labor warmed strangers through howling winters. Coal blooms, lavender drifts, pianos hush. In 1872, Army Scout Thomas R. Tommy, Birchfield of mixed Choctaw and Irish heritage, developed a shadow tent, a double canvas lean-to lined with black-dyed muslin. Her field notes explain that the dark lining absorbed scarce sunlight, radiating warmth as night fell. The muslin smelled of walnut hull dye, earthy and slightly bitter, and she rigged the tent using willow poles that creaked softly in gusts. Tommy placed snowshoes against the entrance to deflect spindrift, and she scattered goose down over pine bough bedding, the feathers fluttering like snowflakes. She measured interior warmth with a simple alcohol thermometer, and recorded a 6-degree advantage over standard tents. Commanding officers mocked the black interior as symmetry chic, suppressing adoption. Tommy buried her plans in a cedar box, only for a 1960s scout troop to find them while renovating a barn, igniting renewed interest in passive solar camp design. The loop reveals innovation whispered in canvas folds before sunlit curiosity brought it back. An 1888 article in the Cheyenne Daily Sun celebrated hotelier Mary Ellen Hart for installing steam-heated headboards in her Plains Hotel annex. The oak headboards shone with beeswax polish, smelling sweet as honeycomb, and copper pipes sloshed quietly within, radiating warmth directly at sleepers' skulls. Mary Ellen timed the steam flow using brass valves, ensuring a continuous murmur rather than scalding bursts. Guests reported deeper sleep, their dreams free from teeth chattering interruptions. However, a rival hotelier spread rumors that the steam carried disease, and guests dwindled. Hart dismantled the headboards, selling the copper as scrap. Decades later, renovation crews found pipe channels in the walls, and archived newspaper ads confirmed the installation. Historians now cite her design as an early example of localized radiant heat, rediscovered after competitive slander chilled its reputation. Steam whispers, oak gleams, dreams settle. In 1868, Santa Fe trader Miguel Cordova documented Pueblo neighbors creating light quilts woven with threads coated in mica dust. The quilts shimmered in lantern light, scattering reflections that mimicked starlight on canyon walls. Miguel wrote of the dry, mineral smell of ground mica and the gentle rasp of threads between calloused fingers. He noticed how the reflective surfaces tricked the eye into sensing warmth, encouraging bodies to relax in otherwise cold rooms. When territorial officials taxed mica mining, production dwindled, and the quilts faded from markets. Only fragments remained until 2005, when archaeologists found mica-coated fibers in a family chest. The rediscovery affirmed that psychological comfort light sparkle complemented thermal care, offering a layered understanding of sleep sensory tapestry. A 1877 letter from trail cook Beatrice B. Malloy tells of sleeping atop flour sacks inside a freight wagon stuck in snow near Laramie. The flour dust perfumed the air with warm bread notes clinging to her wool skirt. She wedged iron skillets heated with lard under the sacks, listening to fat sizzle softly like distant rain. B tucked a sprig of mint in her kerchief to mask the skillet smoke, and she set a metronome gifted by a traveling music teacher beside her head, its tick steadying her breath. Her rest, though short, preserved the energy needed to feed drovers at dawn. The letter remained folded in a cookbook until a descendant showcased it at a culinary history fair, rediscovering the interplay between kitchen tools and winter beds that nourished bodies beyond mealtime. Flour floats, skillets hum, mint cools. In 1889, ethnologist James Mooney recorded Cherokee blacksmith John Ground crafting iron dream cages, frameworks hung above beds in Oklahoma Territory to hold heated stones and herb bundles. The iron frames radiated warmth downward, and the herbs, sweetgrass, tobacco, and cedar, released layered scents. John's hammer clanged rhythmically, the forge's orange glow flickering against earthen walls. Mooney noted that the cage's lattice patterns mirrored stories about constellations guiding hunters home. When relocation pressures intensified, many families buried the cages to keep them from confiscation. In 1934, drought exposed one cage along a creek, and its recovery reintroduced the practice. The cycle of concealing for reverence, then unearthing, illustrates how protection from oppression can veil knowledge until nature itself lifts the cover. A 1892 memorandum from Yellowstone's Norris Geyser Basin Ranger Station details how Shoshone guide Willow Snow taught rangers to heat volcanic pumice stones in geyser runoff before placing them in canvas bags at their feet. The stones hissed sharply when lifted from steaming pools, releasing sulfur scents that clung to blankets. Rangers noted how the warmth lasted for hours, and the soft pumice texture felt like coarse bread. Park administrators later banned the practice, citing potential geyser damage, effectively sealing the knowledge. In 1976, geothermal researchers interviewing elders learned of the method anew, rediscovering a sustainable approach that balanced respect for sacred springs with survival needs, albeit now practiced in controlled forms. Mist coils. Stones glow. Sulfur lingers. Caroline Lark. Svensson, a telegraph matron stationed at Fort Shaw in 1886, engineered sleep music by suspending violin strings over stove vents so warmed air plucked them faintly. The whispering vibrations, barely audible, soothed telegraph trainees rattled by wind keening outside. The strings smelled faintly of rosin, and the air tasted metallic from coal stoves. Lark measured pulse rates before and after the nightly ritual, documenting reductions in restlessness. Commanders tolerated the experiment until strings snapped and struck an officer, after which they ordered removal. Her notebook, rediscovered in 2015, demonstrates how auditory texture joined thermal comfort, reminding us that gentle soundscapes held power in stark winters. In 1900, Nez Perce Elder Bright River shared with missionary Dr. Samuel McKean the practice of digging shallow breathing beds, lined with heated river stones and cedar boughs during brutal winters near Lapwai. The cedar smell was sharp, almost citrus, and the stones crackled when moisture touched them. Bright River explained that sleepers inhaled air filtered through the boughs, staying moist enough to prevent bleeding noses. McKean recorded the method but hesitated to publish, fearing cultural appropriation. His notes remained private until descendants donated them to a tribal museum, where they were interpreted by community historians, affirming that reverence, not secrecy, initially kept the knowledge hushed. Cedars murmur, stones exhale. Breath deepens. In 1873, Georgia-born freedwoman Lucille Harper ran a Denver laundry where she devised steam cradles for infants of railroad workers. She placed wicker baskets over kettles emitting gentle plumes, the steam perfuming the room with starch and lye. Lucille lined the baskets with wool scraps scented by blue indigo dye, believing the hue soothed crying babies. She timed steam bursts with a pocket watch, ensuring moisture never dampened the blankets. The cradles let mothers rest while snow pelted the windows. A city inspector closed her operation for lacking official licensing, silencing the practice. In 1990, a local historian compiling African American business registries found testimonies praising Lucille's cradles, reviving recognition of her quiet engineering. Snow taps, steam rises, indigo calms. An 1881 diary from prospector Jebediah Cole recounts sleeping inside a mine drift near Virginia City, lining walls with gunny sacks filled with sawdust soaked in whale oil. The smell was pungent, almost rancid, yet it waterproofed the sacks, and he noted the muffled crunch when leaning against them. He placed a French clockwork heat regulator acquired from a travelling peddler beside a small brazier, its gears ticking like a heart. The regulator dripped alcohol at intervals, feeding the flame and preventing smoke buildup. Such precision gifted miners a stable warmth in treacherous tunnels. The device broke, and without parts the method lapsed. Only when mining museums displayed the regulator decades later did visitors grasp how technology and scent coalesced underground to cradle sleep. A 1898 ledger from Fort Hall Reservation school documents matron Ellen Two Clouds creating star quilts with alternating layers of wool and muslin painted with natural dyes that glowed faintly under lamplight. She infused them with prairie turnip starch, lending a nutty smell and stiffening the fabric against drafts. Students described the quilts rustling like autumn leaves. When federal inspectors accused her of misusing supplies, she was reassigned, and the quilts disappeared from records. In 2003, quilters reviving star patterns interviewed elders who remembered Ellen's work, rediscovering the sensory warmth these quilts provided, along with the pride they instilled in children sleeping far from home. Lanterns flicker, starch sweetens, quilts shine. As the 20th century approached, Wyoming sheep rancher Thomasina Bell installed wind-driven ventilators atop bunkhouses, the vanes squealing softly as they spun. She lined bunks with lanolin-rich wool, the smell musky yet comforting, and hung cobalt glass bottles filled with hot water from hooks near the headboards, casting blue light across the room. The ventilators whisked away smoke while preserving warmth, a balance she measured using sling psychrometers stolen moments before bed, their damp muslin slapping softly in the air. Ranch hands initially grumbled at the eerie blue glow, but later prized the restful nights. When Thomasina sold the ranch, new owners removed the contraptions, preferring cheaper solutions. Agricultural historians unearthed her journals in 1989, rediscovering a fusion of airflow engineering and chromatic therapy that once lulled weary herders. A 1905 homesteader reunion recorded Scottish immigrant Angus MacLeod's recollection of 1870s winter nights spent in sod houses near the Yellowstone. He spoke of woolen sleep socks, knitted with copper wire threading, the metal warming quickly near the hearth and holding heat against toes. The socks crackled softly when bent, and he remembered the metallic tang on his hands. Angus explained that copper symbolized prosperity. Wearing it to bed felt like a blessing. His memory was nearly forgotten until a textile conservator replicated the socks, confirming their thermal efficiency. The rediscovery fused cultural symbolism with practical warmth, showing how meaning and comfort intertwined. Copper warms, wool whispers, blessings rest. On the high plains of 1884, Mexican healer Rosa Lujan tended to sheep shearers by brewing chocolate spiced with cloves, the aroma filling adobe walls where men slept. She dipped wool blankets into the chocolate's froth before wringing them out. The residual fat softened fibers and trapped heat. Rosa timed the process with a rosary, each bead a heartbeat. She listened to breaths slowing under the cocoa-scented covers and believed the sweetness guarded dreams. Priests chastised her for indulgence, pushing the practice underground. In 1978, culinary historians interviewing her descendants rediscovered the technique, acknowledging indulgence as resilience when nights bit hard. Chocolate sighs, cloves tingle, dreams sweeten. As railroads pushed westward, 1892 conductor Hiram Patel introduced circular sleeping rotations, aligning crew rest with the rhythmic clatter of wheels. He installed cork-lined sleeping compartments within cabooses, the cork smelling of damp wine cellars and muffling rattles. Hiram hung brass gongs that rang softly when track joints clicked, syncing with breath. He documented fewer accidents after the change, proving rhythmic sleep preserved alertness. Company executives later replaced cork with cheaper pine, erasing his innovation. When rail enthusiasts restored a caboose in 2007 and uncovered cork remnants, Hiram's logbook surfaced, rediscovering the music of rail sleep he orchestrated. Rails pulse, cork hushes, gongs glow. Kerosene lamplight swayed over the final winter journals of botanist Sarah Vickers in 1899, camping near the Snake River to study alpine flora. She slept within canvas stiff from frost, wrapping herself in layers of goat wool, brushed with camphor oil, its medicinal scent sharp in her nose. Sarah tucked pressed flowers between blanket folds, believing their colors kept loneliness at bay. She timed her sleep in tandem with a pocket chronometer, listening to its metallic heartbeat amid distant wolf howls. Her notes linger on the question, is the warmth we weave enough to appease the mountains? She died that spring, yet her notebooks survive, encouraging us to consider warmth as both science and prayer. Snow hushed